thank you so much for coming out to the Food Summit in general, but especially for the canning session. You will learn a lot of things about canning.
Wait, Susan, wait. Is it on?
Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay.
You need a step stool, maybe. You're not tall enough for the microphone.
Is that it?
Can I lower this? All right, we'll put it where.
Hello. Can you hear me now in the back? Thank you. Okay. Yes, Sarah. Step stools are part of my life. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for coming to the summit, and thank you for your interest in canning. I'm going to introduce to you Sarah Thrush, but before she takes the microphone and teaches you about all things, I would like to just say she's a wonderful person to work with, but she has an incredible knowledge on canning. So she has come out with her book. Okay, we are selling it back at our canning booth just behind you, and I highly recommend all of you to come back and pick up a book. I grew up in the garden, canning a lot of things with my family, but I found this extremely interesting and helpful. It's just all of the above, and she makes canning sound simple. We know it isn't. It's not easy, but she has the usual and the unusual in her book. So we really appreciate Sarah, and we thank you, Sarah, for coming and teaching here again. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you.
Hello. I want to make sure that I set this right at the correct heights to knock myself out. All right. So thank you, Susan, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm here today also with Tammy from Rebel Canners. And so Tammy and I, we're going to be kind of canning on and off all day. So I'm going to start with this bruschetta in a jar. We're going to talk about canning. We're going to talk about the basics and some more experienced types of topics. And then we're going to go back and forth. So I'll start with the water bath. Then Tammy is going to teach you all about how to can milk and dairy products. And then I'm going to go back and we're going to start talking about pressure canning and meat products. And then Tammy will finish up with our fruits and fruit juices. So, having said that, it is very warm today. Please take breaks as needed. Please drink your water. Please go to the restroom, get up, walk outside the tent, get some fresh air, whatever you need to do. Please don't feel like you're going to be interrupting us if you need to do that, okay? We all want to stay healthy today. I'm actually going to move over here. Can you still hear me? All right, great. So thank you guys so much for being here today. I want to get a little bit of read on the room, and then I want to talk just a little bit about canning and the whys of canning. How many in here already currently can something at home? You're already a canner. You consider yourself a canner. Okay, and anybody that has never, ever canned? Okay. And then I'm going to need you to raise your hand if you bought that pressure canner, but you never used it. There's always a couple. There's always a couple. So what I'd like to do here today, outside of talking about just the basics of canning and showing you how to do a couple of recipes from my book, is I also want you to leave here empowered. If you don't leave here unafraid to get that canner out of the box, I haven't done a very good job today. All right, so that is my goal for you today, is to take the canner out of the box. Amber, if you're watching at home, I am not calling you out live on social media right now. One of my friends. What we're going to do right now is we're going to talk about water bath canning, and then we're going to go into the pressure canning next. So we're just going to start off with what I call the basics of water bath canning. So how does water bath canning work? It works by heating our food to a specific temperature for a predetermined amount of time, boiling that food, driving all the oxygen out of the jar, and then probably one of the most important parts is using a lid that will seal and stay sealed, that will not let the oxygen back inside the jar. So that's how water bath canning works. How long does the food last? Once you've done the water bath canning, how long does it last on your shelves? Anybody? 2 to 5? How many? 2? Anybody else? 3 weeks? Oh, I hope not. That's short. That's too short. It can go past 5, but use your good judgment, right? Okay. So the clear and cut answer is dun da da da. There isn't one. So what your canning lids will tell you is how long they stay good sealed. All right. So how long is the lid mechanically going to stay sealed for you? You can go to some different websites that will give you all kinds of different information. They'll say use it within 12 months, use it within 18 months, use it within 2 years, 3 years. But the technical answer is if you process that food correctly in the jar and it stays sealed, it's good forever. Now, the caveat to this is nobody wants to eat 20-year-old tomatoes. Nobody. So our food is going to break down over time no matter what. Even if you do the most perfect canning ever, it's going to break down. So your tomatoes at 1 year are going to have a different consistency than the tomatoes at 2 years, the tomatoes at 3 years, 5 years, and grandma's tomatoes that you found out in the garage 20 years ago. They're all going to be different. So what do I suggest? I suggest that you are canning enough food to take you from grow season to grow season. That means if you are doing green beans, that you look at your family and how many times in a year you eat green beans, and then you jar up the appropriate amount of green beans to take you to that next grow season. Does that make sense? Now, not everybody starts off canning that large, and you don't have to. Some people are just like, I'm going to grow 1 tomato plant, I'm going to put 6 jars of tomatoes on my shelf, and that's good enough. And I urge you to do that if that's your comfortable spot. Remember, I want that canner out of the box today. We don't want to leave that in the box anymore. 1 to 3 years. That's how often my family rotates our food in and out. 1 to 3 years. Do I have peaches on the shelf from 2019? Yep, I sure do. You want to know why? Because I got peaches really, really cheap. I got a good deal. It fell off the back of a truck. I had a friend that helped me out. We got peaches that were really, really good, really cheap. I canned all those up, and guess what? I haven't bought peaches since 2019. Now, I am down to my last, time is coming soon, and peaches is one of the things I absolutely hate canning. They're just very, very sticky. So, water bath canning. We're going to start with a simple recipe. It's going to be what I call bruschetta in the jar. If you follow me on social media, you have probably seen me do this recipe before. The reason I like this one is it is slightly different than just a regular pickled tomato. And it is also very beginner friendly for the user. If you bought my book, if you didn't buy my book, there's still time. But if you bought the book and you want to follow along, we're going to be on page, I can't see, 99. So 99 is your bruschetta in the jar with all the step-by-steps. How many people grow grape or cherry tomatoes in your garden? What happens when they take off? They're gone. They take over the whole garden, the whole yard. Before you know it, you're stepping on them. They're everywhere. The recipe is, because we're going to pickle it, because we're going to water bath can it, even the ones that I stick in my freezer, so I have enough to do a big batch, the ones that stick in the freezer, they don't have to be perfect when they go into the jar. And so this recipe is really good for that. I can gather up all my tomatoes, stick them in the freezer, leave them in there until I'm ready, and then pull them out and do this recipe. Another thing I like to do in my garden is what I call a pocket ranch. So I carry a little ranch container in my pocket, and then that way I can eat a bunch of these when I go out because they are a prolific plant. If you have never grown these before, it's a nice area to start with because it's going to give you a lot of confidence. So today we're going to start with the grape tomatoes or cherry tomatoes, whatever you have access to. And then we're going to use a host of spices, and we're going to use 2 different types of vinegar. We're going to use a balsamic vinegar, and we're going to use a regular white vinegar. Every vinegar bottle has a percentage on it that will tell you what the acidity is in that bottle. And so you want to make sure that you are using a high enough acid to do this water bath canning. This one is going to be around 6-7%, and then the white vinegars are usually around 5%, and that's diluted with water. So do you need to buy pickling vinegar? Do you need to buy pickling vinegar? No. Pickling vinegar, I hate to tell you, it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick. Pickling vinegar is a gimmick. So pickling vinegar tells you that you're at the correct percentage, and you don't have to do any thinking. Regular vinegar, you just need to look at the bottle and make sure it's the correct percentage. So you don't need to buy pickling vinegar. Do you need to buy pickling salts? No, you don't have to. The reason we suggest using pickling salts is because it helps from keeping the jars get cloudy. So when you use a regular table salt, they sometimes have like an anti-caking agent added to them to keep them from sticking together, and that can make the jars cloudy. So if you are entering your food at your state fair, you want to use canning salts. That's going to keep that liquid nice and clear for you, but otherwise you can just use regular salt. Now, if you have a family member that is allergic to shellfish, you want to stay away from salts that are iodized or have iodine in them. Otherwise, you can pick whatever salts you want. So some people like adding like Himalayan salts, and some people will use just regular table salt. It's totally up to you. The nice thing about canning is you can kind of adjust what you need in the jar for your preference, your family's preference, and your dietary needs. All right, so the first thing I've done is we've washed all the jars, we've washed all the lids, we've washed everything. I'm getting a boiling hot water bath canner going. Now this canner, do we have a hot pad? Yeah. You can use any canner you want. Okay, so it does not have to be those enamel canners. What you're looking for is a canner that is deep enough to cover your jars with 2 inches of water, 1 to 2 inches of water. If you can completely submerge these jars, then that pot is big enough. That also makes this a very economical way to start canning. So you could potentially do this with any type of canner you have at home right now. The other thing you want is something in the bottom of it to protect the jars off the bottom of the canner. For that, I'm using a trivet. It's just one of the trivets out of the pressure canners, but you can use a towel. You could use, have you ever seen those wire baskets that the jars go in? It's like a lifter. You can use one of those. You can use whatever you want. But you want something to protect the jars. So I'm actually going to put these jars into the hot water, and I'm going to heat the jars up because I am going to heat the brine up. So I want my jars and my brine, or my liquid, to be kind of the same temperature. Does anybody know why we try to match the temperatures? Yeah? Say it louder for everybody. That's correct. The glass breaks if the temperatures change too drastically. Very good. And so what we want to do is we want to heat everything together. Now, if you're using a recipe that's using cold food, you won't need to heat the jars. Question? Did you have a question, ma'am? No. Oh, okay. Oh, she's looking for you. Your wife's over here, sir. Your wife's over here. He's still looking. I don't think he thinks I'm talking to him. Your wife's over here, sir. I believe you're wearing matching shirts. Right here. Did I just steal one of your jars? I don't care. It's okay. I'll share. Okay. We're used to. Okay. All right. So if you've ever listened to anybody talk about canning, they'll tell you you need to do what to the jars? Sterile. Yeah, that's a joke, you guys. Nope, that's not right. So we can't sterilize anything in a home kitchen, unfortunately. So we can bring this up to high boiling temperatures. We can bring up the jars to boiling temperatures, the water, and everything inside that pot will be considered sterile. What happens the minute I open the lid? It's exposed to what? Air and oxygen. So at that point, is it sterile? No. So what we're looking to do is sanitize. We want clean jars, clean lids, clean rings, and then we want to match the temperatures of what we're putting in the jar and the canner. All right, so that's the goal for water bath canning. Now, water bath canning is good for only a certain type of foods. Does anybody know some of those foods that we can use for water bath canning? Non-proteins. What does that include? Jelly, pickles, tomato sauces, tomato products, jams, chutneys, apple butter, bruschetta. Yes. And then anything that goes into a pickling brine. So you want your high acid foods, your fruits, your produce, and anything going into a pickling brine. Now the difference between canning, say, corn and canning corn salsa is a difference in pH because of the brine. So for canning a corn salsa, it has a high pH because we're using a vinegar-based brine. So is that going to be water bath or pressure can? High acid. Water bath. If I'm doing just corn by itself, pressure can. So when we talk canning, the food dictates the process. The food dictates the process. How do you know which food? Your canning books, buy your canning books. They're going to tell you which foods. They're going to tell you the pH of your foods and what recipes are safe for which type of method. All right, while those are heating up, we're going to make the actual brine. And again, I have to put on my glasses because I can't see. And we're going to start with 4 cups of water. And we're going to heat this up. And we're going to start with hot liquid, hot jars, hot everything. So in a second pot, I'm going to add 4 cups of water. And then we're going to add our vinegars, and I said we're using 2 for this one. We're going to use 1 cup of white and 1/2 cup of balsamic. 1 cup white, 1/2 cup of balsamic. Now, what makes this quote-unquote like a bruschetta in a jar is the balsamic. So if you've ever, and I know I keep saying bruschetta and everybody's like, it's bruschetta. I know it is, but I'm not from around here. And where I'm from, we say bruschetta. All right. And 1/2 cup. We're going to add this to the pot too. And then my instructions tell me the next thing we're going to do is bring that to a boil. And 1 cup of sugar. Now, can you omit sugar in a canning recipe? Anybody in here diabetic? Maybe, possibly. You have sugar restrictions, or maybe you're just trying to eat healthier or get away from white sugar. You can substitute in some of these recipes a white sugar for a sugar substitute, but be aware that that is going to change your end product. So if you're using something like, say, a Splenda, Splenda is typically very, very sweet in comparison to sugar. It takes less Splenda. So I always tell people when you're starting off a new recipe and you're actually like playing around a little bit with sugars or salts or anything like that, maybe do a trial run first. Make yourself a small batch. And just see if you like the end product before you go making 400 jars of it. All right, the fun thing about this recipe is we're going to add all of the spices by the jar. And what I mean by that is this recipe is written specifically so you can line up the jars and add the spices jar by jar. So that makes it, in my opinion, a lot easier to can. Some recipes in some of the other books, what they'll have you do is make a big batch of something and then pour it into each individual jar. And for me, it always just works easier when I can go jar to jar to jar. So that's how I wrote the recipes. All right, so next for our spices, we're going to start with basil, oregano, dill seeds, garlic cloves, and we're just going to start adding these. Now, while I'm adding these to the jars, I'm going to have you guys start asking questions. So what we've covered so far is the difference between water bath canning and pressure canning, why we heat the jars, how we decide, and then we talked about sterilization in the kitchen versus sanitation, and we talked about the different types of vinegars versus high acid and low acid. So just about those subjects, is there anything that we didn't cover or a question that you have so far? Nobody? I did my job? Can you use Redmond salt? Redmond real salt. Yeah, the salt is salt of your choice. Yep, salt of your choice. And if you have a recipe, remember, canning is not salting. If you're a flavor enhancer. I saw another hand raised. Yeah? Sure. Yep. Salt of your choice. Again, when you're changing a recipe, I would start with a small batch, see how you like that end product before you go making a bunch of them. But just test a couple of the jars. No. So you're asking like different flavors of balsamic? No, it's totally up to you. The important thing is that you have the correct amount. So we're using 1 cup of white, a half a cup of red, excuse me, or balsamic. You just want to make sure that you have 1.5 cups in the recipe, but the type is totally up to you. And that's the one thing that I really enjoy about canning is it can be tailored to your taste buds. It doesn't have to be, yes, there are certain hard and fast rules we have to follow. We have to follow time. We have to follow temperature. We have to follow how long the jars are going to be processed for. But as far as what we're putting into the jars, you can really tailor any of those spices that you want. If there's a recipe in that book and it calls for cumin and you don't like cumin, don't use it. Just omit it. Okay, that is heating. All right, so per jar, we're going to do half. Most of these are half. So half dill seed. And when I say half, I mean teaspoons. Half dill seed, half mustard seed. We're just going to follow the recipe and fill up all the jars. I'm actually going to take this stuff over to there so I can work more efficiently. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was canning for food security. And what I mean by canning for food security is kind of like how my family does, kind of how I run my pantry and I run my kitchen in my house, is that when we look at foods, we start looking at how much of a food do we need for the whole year. And not everybody starts that big again. You can start, how much food do I need for a week? How much food do I need for a month? How much food do I need for a year? But you really want to start looking at your food differently if you're starting to think about how you want to get your family food secure. So for us, I'll take corn for example, or even these tomatoes. I know for a fact that we eat about two jars of this once a month. So that means in a year's time, I need 24 of these jars. So that helps me plan my gardens. How many jars do I need to get off of one plant? Well, if I need 4 jars for every one plant, then I know I have to, do you see what I'm saying with the math? So once you start thinking about food this way, you can really start thinking about how can I put this food up to make sure that we have it when times are lean, when money is tight, when perhaps my grocery store or my farmer's market doesn't have that food. And you can really start securing your food future. So this is the fun part. We're going to start stacking everything in the jars. And I don't know if everybody can see me, but I'll try to do it like up in this area. You know what we need is one of those big mirrors. Yeah. We need one of those cooking mirrors. It smells good. It does smell good, doesn't it? Did you say you had a question? Huh? Okay. Yeah. you guys think it's hot down there, I'm having a good time. Does anybody can outside? Nobody cans outside? You do? I can outside. I like canning outside. It keeps from heating my house up. Can I move this a little bit? No. Guess I can't. Yeah. Is it possible just to move it closer so I can not... That's as far as it goes? What about this one? I can? Thanks, Rob.
Which way, Sarah?
Just this way so I'm not, like, yelling.
Oh, boy.
How's it spin?
Is that good?
It's better.
Yeah. Where do you...
It's better.
Okay. Be careful when you get it.
Thank you.
Good?
Is that better? Okay. So the thing about food security is a lot of the reasons why we can, in my family and my household, is for food security. One, you get to know what's in the jar, right? So you get to control everything that's in the jar. But two, you can help build a food secure future. Where I live, it's cold. Have you ever been to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? Have you ever heard of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? Really? A lot of times people haven't even heard of it. So the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, it's pretty darn cold. I mean, our winter's about 6 months, sometimes 7. Our lowest temps in like January are around -20, -30. We get 40, 50 mile per hour winds because we're right on the water. It's a peninsula. What do you want? But one of the things that we have to think about living in that climate is, number one, I have a really short grow season, so I have to make the absolute most out of the time that I have. When I tell you that my homestead and my farms suffer during the summer months when I'm out like doing these things and like running around, like my family's got to pick up that whole slack, right? So we got a real short grow season. We got to like squeeze every minute we can out of that. But then we also have to preserve the food. Because there is no point in growing acres and acres of crops if when you pull that food in, it's going in the garbage. You're just wasting your time, your resources, and all of your energy. So you got to have some way of preserving that food when it comes in, and that's another reason why we do a lot of canning. In my family, we can about 2,000 jars per year. Sometimes it's a little higher than that, especially if we have a bumper crop. We'll have a lot more jars than that. But you don't have to start that big. I want you to start small. I want you to do what's manageable. And I want you to start with things that will bring you joy. If you are only doing this because you want to put up a ton of food and it's not bringing you joy, I'm here to tell you this is going to burn you out quick. Real quick. And then you're not going to want to can it all. Make sure you're doing the things that are bringing you joy too. I probably have about, I don't know, 200 jars of jelly and jams on my shelves. Do you know how much jelly and jams we eat? Hardly any. But do you know where those go? My friends, my neighbors, gifts, the mail lady. If you're watching, hi mail lady. You know, it's a way for us to help feed our community. You had a question? I saw a hand. Yeah. Okay. So she's asking, I'm making my own recipe. How do I taste it? Like, do I taste it? So my suggestion to you is, number one, if you're making up your own canning recipes, first of all, if you're new, don't do this. Let's just put that out there. If you're new, don't do this. Stick to the canning books. Get used to the canning rules. Get used to which rules you can bend before they break, right? We want to be safe first and foremost. But if you are a more experienced canner and you understand the rules a little bit more and you want to start playing around with some recipes, the first thing you want to do is look at the actual individual foods and how much time does each one of those individual items need. So like say you're doing tomatoes and onions. Onions have the longer processing time than the tomatoes do. So you want to look at that. And then what I would do is I would can a jar or like maybe 4 jars, and I would actually finish the canning process, take them out of the canner, and then I label those 4 jars. 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, or 3 months. And what I do is I taste test them at that time. Because your jar is going to taste different the day it's processed, a month, 6 months, a year, especially if you're doing things like pickling. So I usually do 4 jars and then I label them. That was a great question. I saw one more hand raised. Yeah?
How many people do you have in your family?
So we have 5 children and 1 grandchild. But that is not all the people that live in our home. So currently, full-time, living in our home, 4 of us. I have some adult children that have moved out. It's been great. I have more time for other things. So, yeah, 4 people. And then what I talk about in the book, too, and I know I keep saying the book, but the reason I wrote this is because we talk about these things every time I come to these, and people have the same kind of questions. So that's why I really wanted to get it in the book. In the book, I talk about how to can 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. And I give charts for those. And I give examples of, keeping a food inventory. Do you have any idea how many ears of corn your family ate last year? Most people don't, unless you're me. But we keep a food inventory, and that's because I run my house like a business. And I know this sounds extreme, and you do not have to go this extreme. But if you start thinking in these terms of it's one of the most expendable products that you use over and over and over again. Food, ketchup, yeah. Like, what's that most expendable thing? Take a look at that and go, oh, it's ketchup for my family. What can I do to cut down on the cost of my ketchup? And if you start thinking like that, you get into a cycle where you start using your food budget to actually make you money. And then guess what happens when you're saving money? You can spend it on more chickens. Hello. I would like to say that I went to the chicken store the other day and came home with not a single chicken. It was tough. Yeah? Temperature, ambient temperature, will definitely have an effect on that. Today, we're all right. These are still very hot as I'm putting these in here. But that's a great question. So if you're canning like in the winter and you want your jars to stay hot, what I do is I pull 1 jar out at a time. So I'll pull that jar out, I'll put in the jelly, the jam, the tomatoes, and then I put that jar back in the canner, and then I pull the next one out. And then when I get them all done, then I start bringing it up to a full rolling boil and starting my timer. Today, I don't think we're going to have any problems. It's a little warm. Oh my gosh, what am I on time?
It doesn't matter.
It does matter.
Sarah's time. It's good.
No, we can't be on Sarah time.
1:30. You got half
1:30. All right, we got half an hour. Great, perfect. Okay, so for this recipe, typically I make about 8 to 9 pint jars at a time, and I typically also use my pressure canner for this, just because I can double stack in that. This one I might be able to double stack in. I'm not sure. I haven't tried it. But we're going to put in as many jars as we can. All right, to this we're going to add our hot brine and our spices, so I'm just going to start using those. All right. Half, a half, a half, a half, a half.
You made these spices on your own. You didn't use like a McCormick packet or something like that, right?
Okay, so that's a great question. Did I make these spices on my own, or did I use like a McCormick packet? If you were in your grocery stores, in the canning aisles, most of them will have like a pre-made pickling spice for you. You can totally use that. That's fine. You can use that. The reason I don't is because the sheer amounts of canning that I do, it is not financially responsible for me to buy pickling spice already pre-made. So I can buy bulk spices from like Azure Standard or wherever you guys get your bulk spices locally. I can buy those for much cheaper and make up my own pickling spices that last me a lot longer than to buy, I don't know if you've seen them, but like one of those little McCormick pickling spices. In my store, they're like $4.99. Are they about that here? $5.99. So I can make a gallon of that for pennies on the ounce. So that's what I do.
Sarah, they went up to like $6 today.
$6? Yeah, it's been a while since I bought any. If I miss a jar, just ignore me, because sometimes I get talking and it's... and again, this is mustard seed, and I just did coriander or dill. We're gonna do coriander. So this is all your typical like pickling spices. Also, if you don't like balsamic, you can 100% skip it and just replace it with white vinegar. It will come out more like a pickled tomato than it will like a bruschetta. And this is oregano. Yeah? Correct. So she's asking, why am I not using citric acid? Do you guys know what citric acid does in canning? Thought I heard somebody say it. It raises the pH, or it raises the acidity level. So citric acid is kind of like, you think of it in terms of like a lemon juice or a lime juice or something like that. It helps raise the acid. But it's not needed when we're doing a pickling brine because the vinegar is very, very acidic. And that's why we add sugar to it. Have you ever tried to take a tablespoon of, or even a shot glass of like apple cider vinegar? It's good for your gut health. Man, is it hard on the tongue. So that's why we add a little bit of sugar to it as well to help balance out the acidity. Onion powder. Right? Yeah, onion powder. So some tomatoes, if you want to start a fight, like a knockdown, drag-out canning fight, there's a couple topics. That is one of them. Do tomatoes need lemon juice? Do they need citric acid? And I'll tell you why this is such a big fight amongst canners, or a big argument, is because Ball has come out with a couple of different books over the years, quite a few books, and they keep changing their mind. I did? This one? Looks like that one. They keep changing their mind. So they'll have some recipes that add it, and then the next time that new edition comes out, they remove it again. And the reason is because, remember we talked about the acidity charts and where the food falls? Guess where tomatoes fall? Like right in the middle, right? So they're like that teetering produce that sometimes they need them, sometimes they don't. And this also depends greatly, get this, it depends greatly on the variety of tomato you're using. Some tomatoes are more acidic than others. And then get this, it depends on your soil health. So your soil health has a direct correlation with the amount of acid that's going to end up in your tomatoes. And so I can tell you, hey, you're using Roma tomatoes. Roma tomatoes need lemon juice. And then I test those same tomatoes on the farmer 5 miles down the road, and they're not acidic enough. You know, it's just that simple. So I always tell beginners, if you're worried about things like citric acid or lemon juice, add it. It's not going to hurt anything. Adding doesn't hurt. Taking away hurts. So adding doesn't hurt. If you want to add a little bit to give yourself like more peace of mind, absolutely do that. We're going to do basil next. Basil, if you're French.
You want to use fresh basil and not fried?
You can use either. Who asked that? You can use either. I also want to mention that, yeah.
Sarah, if you're going to pressure can your tomato sauce, is it not necessary at that point to add any citric acid or lemon?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you are pressure canning, that's a whole different conversation. So when you're pressure canning, the foods do not need the citric acid or the lemon juice because you are sterilizing that food in a whole different manner. Does that make sense? Now, sometimes I add it anyways because I like the freshness that the lemon juice gives to the actual recipe. It's got nothing to actually, and sometimes I'll add orange juice. We're doing a recipe later that uses an orange juice. It's going to raise the acidity, but it's not going to change whether it's safe or not to eat it. It's just because I like the flavor of it. So there's that too. Okay, so you asked about fresh versus dried. So anytime you are canning, the very most tastiest foods you're ever going to eat are going to be fresh, always. If you grab those cucumbers and make pickles, if you grab them off the vine before the sun licks them in the morning, before they start to dry up and lose all their condensation from overnight, they are the best pickles to make. If you can grab them before the sun hits them and you're pickling them before the sun goes down, right? That's going to be the freshest foods. But if all you have access to is the cucumber at the grocery store, and it's a difference between having cucumbers and not having cucumbers, you work with what you can get, right? And it's the same way with spices. So sometimes you'll see me using like a powder. Sometimes I'll be using fresh. And these can be interchanged. Remember, the spices in your recipes are not going to change how you do things. So it's not going to change. Like, I'm not suddenly going to need to pressure can this because I added fresh basil instead of dry basil. That looks like enough. I usually use about 2 or 3 per. And if you want to make these look like really, really pretty, you can layer stuff. So you can do like some tomatoes, then your garlic and basil, then some tomatoes, garlic and basil. I will tell you from experience, the only time I take the time to do things that are really, really aesthetically pleasing is like if I'm going to the county fair, if I want a ribbon. Otherwise, once we put these in this hot water bath canner, and you're going to see this, they're going to start to shrink, they're going to start to explode, they're going to start to float to the top. Nothing in this jar is going to look as gorgeous as it does right now. So once you actually process your jars, they start to actually get a little bit ugly. Yes? I'm not peeling them? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, so she's asking, do I need to peel my tomatoes? Well, not for this recipe. But if I were making like a ketchup or sweet and sour or an enchilada sauce or something like that, then I would definitely run them through a folly mill and get all the skins and everything off of them because I would be making a sauce. If I'm doing stewed tomatoes, sometimes I leave the skins on. Sometimes after I stew them, I just, whatever's left is what gets put in the jar. And so it doesn't really make a difference in that respect. For this recipe, once the cherry tomatoes are done being processed, I'm going to tell you you can actually open the jars and use them in a minute. But I'm going to mash them anyways. I'm going to mash them and then spread them on bread or spread them on toast or spread them on cream cheese. Yeah, so it's not going to matter. You make it you. Yeah. I'm looking actually for it now. To the right? Thanks. Some garlic cloves. And again, in my house, we like lots and lots of garlic, so I usually put like 3 to 4, but the recipe calls for 2, so I'm just putting 2 in there now. I tried to write all the recipes to not taste too heavy. One of the other reasons we can, or I can, outside of food security, outside of, knowing what's going in our jars, is because this, to me, there's a real good feel to this. So if you're a canner or if you've ever canned anything, one of the most satisfying things ever is as soon as the jars are out of the canner and you hear them start to seal and you see your beautiful food, and the very first thing you want to do is go take a picture and post it on Facebook and be like, look at what I did. There is a sense of pride that comes with canning. My mother, I'm a 3rd generation canner. My grandparents canned, my mother canned. This is how we grew up. And she would always call this a labor of love. And it really is. Because nobody is honestly crazy enough to do that. There's just all these benefits. Wipe off the rims with a little bit of white vinegar, and then we're going to add our brine, and then I'm going to wipe off the rims. So here's our brine here. Ooh, and I got it nice and toasty. And you can smell it. I don't know if you have ever boiled a pickling brine before, but it is a cross between like dirty feet and just dirt. It smells horrible. Do not let this throw you off. Every time I make candied jalapenos, same thing. My son is like, he'll come upstairs, start opening the windows and being dramatic, but gagging. I'll wait for him then. I do believe I've made a mess out of your table. I know, but I think I've got this on it because I wasn't sure if this was... Thanks. Helping hands. Use a ladle for this. I'm not, because I'm just going to fly through it. I'm going to use my funnel, and I'm going to add the brine to it. And you see what I mean about labor of love? If you've ever done any canning and your kitchen is clean at the end, I don't want to talk to you ever. One-inch headspace, and I'm going to double check my recipe because I think I just misspoke. I think it's half an inch. Nope, I was right. 1-inch headspace. And then we're going to wipe the rims. I'm just using a little bit of white vinegar. You can also use water, and then we're going to talk about how to get these lids on and secure. And is anybody here currently using the Superb canning lids? You are? If you don't mind sharing, like what would be one of the things you say is different about these? They pop. Like they pop loud. Yeah, so that's the first thing. Don't be afraid if they pop loud. That's normal. Anything else you notice different about them? Say it loud. Don't over tighten them. Yes. Do not over tighten them. The reason is when we're boiling these foods, whether it be a water bath canner or in a pressure canner, what we're actually doing is we're driving all the oxygen out. And as we're driving that oxygen out, the lid itself needs to be able to kind of bounce up and down on the jar and let that oxygen out. If you crank these down too hard, what happens is these will not be able to let that oxygen out. So they'll either A, not seal, or B, they'll pop off, or sometimes even C, they'll prematurely seal, and you'll still have air in the jar. So when we're putting these on, what we're going to use is a 3-finger technique. It's just 3 fingers, and once the lid has been centered on the jar, we're just going to use 3 fingers, and we're just going to twist this until it engages, and the jar starts to spin on our countertop. Now, if you've been canning a really long time, who in here has been canning over 20 years? Over 30 years? Over 40 years? Ooh! Okay, I'm going to get a couple of these going in the can. Give you guys another chance to ask some more questions. So right now what I'm going to do is put these in the canner. This thing you see floating here, this is my rack. Remember I said I need something on the bottom to kind of protect the jars. That's what that is. And I'm going to be using a jar lifter to put these in because everything is still warm. My jars are warm, my brine is warm, everything's warm. This is what they look like. And then once we get them in here, we want to make sure we have 2 inches, about 1 to 2 inches of hot boiling water over the top. I didn't want to go down. And I'm just going to keep. All right, so we talked a little bit earlier about the 2 most important things, I think, and this is just me, the 2 most important things in canning is time and temperature. If you don't reach those 2 things specific for that recipe, that's when you put yourself at risk for any type of foodborne illnesses. Now, any of these recipes, you don't necessarily have to can them. Like this recipe, you don't have to can. If you don't want to can this, you don't have to. But what you need to do then is use refrigeration, right? It needs to go in the refrigerator. Canning is what allows us to keep it on the shelves for a really long time.
Does it taste better out of the refrigerator
With this particular recipe, I like anything that is pickled. Anything, any recipe that's pickled. I like it to sit for a minimum 4 weeks. That's just me. Some people will pickle stuff, they'll put it right in the fridge and they'll eat it right away because they like it that way. But I find in pickling that the longer it sets, the mellower it gets. And it also, the flavors also marry a lot better. And so if you eat this directly out of the refrigerator, like you don't want to can it at all, it's just going to have a different flavor. Did you guys watch the Destination Preservation commercial earlier? She said you can have a kimchi, one recipe at one day tastes entirely different than the same kimchi recipe 17 days later. And that's kind of how canning is too. Everything just kind of changes. Whew. What else? Any other questions? Yep. What's that? I have. The question is, have I used a steam canner over water bath? I find it only can be pressure canned, then you only want to pressure can that. Can you water bath, or I'm sorry, can you water bath can things like meats and corns? Can you do that? You can do anything you want, okay? This is your kitchen, and we always say, your kitchen, your rules. My kitchen, my rules. And what we mean by that is we all come from very different backgrounds. We all have very different methods of doing things. So you need to do at the end of the day what you are comfortable with. So that's why I tell people, if you are only following me on social media, me and only me, and you don't have another book, another resource, another person, you're doing yourself a disservice. I don't want to be the be-all, end-all canning queen. That's not my goal. My goal is that they'll tell you, and I can't just say yes or no because it's not a blanket statement. Like if I'm making a cantaloupe jelly, seriously, that's going to be a lot different than like a raspberry or a blackberry or a strawberry. So you really want to like defer to the recipes for those. And then if you're using pectin, so all your different types of pectins will have like an unfold thing in them, and they will tell you like in that unfold instruction sheet how much lemon juice or how much sugar or how much anything. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to flip over. Tammy's going to go get her milk, maybe?
I got it.
She's got it.
I got to clean up a little bit.
So, and I know, I made a mess. I
Spread
know.
out a little bit,
I did.
Sarah. I
did.
love you.
It's
But you're-
gorgeous, though.
you're
Look
in
at
my
how pretty
space.
it is.
It is.
So what we're going to do now is just kind of switch over. And I am going to be around. So if you have any additional questions, I'm also coming back in this booth after dairy, and we're going to talk about canning meat and run the pressure canner. So this, again, is an all-day thing. Just come in and out as you need to. Take your breaks. We'll take ours. If you don't have any final questions, I'm going to hand this over to Tammy. Tammy's from Rebel Canners. She has a YouTube and an Instagram, a Facebook.
I'm everywhere.
If she's everywhere. So if you have a platform you like to use, Tammy will be on that platform.
Somewhere.
She's going to talk to you today about canning milk. She's going to teach you how to can milk. And then she's also going to just kind of touch on dairy products and answer any questions that you may have about canning dairy and dairy products. Thank you, guys. Oh, is this... I'm sorry.
That's all right. I think that's
You
doable.
don't need any of that, do you?
No, I'm just trying to
No. I don't-
gather it up.
I know what they're at just by looking at them. I think I stole it. Yeah. Yep, hang on. Wait, are you staying over here?
Yeah, I figured you were over there, I was over here. That's why I was set, and then you spread
I
out.
couldn't get to the water bath canner.
That's fine.
Toss it.
I'm going to. You just gotta.
Watch yourself. You still got my timer going?
I do.
Thank
I do.
you.
Got about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Tammy stay here because I made a mess.
It's my fault.
She is. She's almost
All right, you need jars? You got it.
I got them. I'm good. That's it. I just needed.
you need anything from me, Sarah?
Cranberry juice. Cranberry juice. I finally made cranberry juice. It was wonderful.
You like it?
4, 6. Yeah, I had to let it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had the cranberries left, and I thought,
Dehydrate them.
what can I do with that? And they're like, oh, she said put them in muffins.
Cereal, muffins.
I don't want to bake. So I got cottage cheese out there.
Oh. That sounds good. I don't know which ladle you want, but I did not use either. So they're both clean. Oh, here, I brought you some lids if you want these.
Oh, you got them? Oh, perfect.
I'm organized with everybody else's stuff but my own.
All right. Are you all set then, Sarah?
Yeah.
All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. As Sarah said, my name is Tammy McNeil. I am Rebel Canners. I started out on Facebook. People were asking how to do things, and if you asked in the wrong canning Facebook group, you got blocked, you got banned, you got told you couldn't even ask a question. Well, I'm a why learner. I have to ask questions to learn. And I assume that there's a lot of people out there like me who have to ask questions. That's how they learn, you know? And so I started the Rebel Canners Facebook group so that people could come in and ask questions. You know, why is it wrong to do it this way? Well, it's not exactly wrong, it's just different, or it's not the optimal way to do it, you know, and this is what, if you're gonna do it, you know, the old-fashioned way, then you need to follow steps that we lost a whole generation of teachers. Okay, my grandmother taught me and my mom. My mom then went ahead and still taught me. But there's a lot of people out there, we lost a lot of grandmas who didn't teach canning. It became so cheap in stores to buy canned goods of tomato sauce off the shelf that people stopped canning because it just wasn't economical enough for them. Or, you know, we went through where it was an era where it was plentiful on the shelves. And in the last couple years, we've realized that we can't necessarily depend on those grocery shelves to have things for us. I have a huge set of allergies. I want to know what's in my food. If I pick up something and I read the label, I want to be able to read that. Do I have college chemistry background? I have 11 credits in college chemistry. I had to think about it there for a minute. Including analytical chemistry. They taught me how to make baking soda in a test tube. Like, I'll ever use that in the real world. But, you know, I want to be able to read it. I don't want to hear of a whole bunch of chemical names. So, it became very important for me with my set of allergies to go back to what my mom had taught me and do a lot more canning. And with that came the Facebook group and teaching other people to be able to do that for themselves too. I think allergies are more prevalent now than they ever were before to a lot of things. And so it's very important for us to know what's in our food, how it was prepared, who prepared it, where it came from. You know, I mean, right now we're having chickens here shipped to China, processed, frozen, and shipped back to us. You know, I like the mom and pop thing just down the road. So it became very important for me to know where my food was coming from, who was processing it, how it was processed. So that's how I became back into it. And then I wanted a place where people could ask questions. You know, I wanted you to be able to ask how or why do they think it's not good? So, Yeah. Same timer? Got it. Oh, reset. Just a second. I stopped that. Exit. it out. Okay. So it became really important for me to do that. So a part of that is I'm Rebel Canners. If you can find it canned on a grocery shelf, I am willing to teach you how they've done that. And today we're going to do that with milk. A couple fun facts, and I gotta get my notes because I always forget this, and then I wound up sounding a little exaggerated. You might be familiar with a company. The name is associated with milk, Borden's. Okay, Mr. Borden applied for the first patent on his sweetened condensed product in 1856. The USDA, who tells me I can't do milk, did not come into effect until almost 10 years later, 1862. And for the first 20 years, the USDA was only concerned with the meat packing industry and regulating how meat was packaged and, you know, putting that little blue stamp you get on your steak and you go, ooh, what is in my food? Yeah, that was all they did, was that little blue stamp on meat for the first few years. You know, it's only recently that they've been concerned with what I'm doing in my kitchen. And so that was never tested. It wasn't because it wasn't safe. It was because it had been already well established long before the USDA came and started, you know, making their publications and telling us how to do it, what to do, where to do. So there's a big difference between untested by the USDA and unsafe. So you take that with it. This is a recipe that is not tested. Okay? But again, it's been time tested. So, I mean, my grandparents were doing it. I'm pretty sure my grandma's grandma was the one that taught her how to can. So that's been quite a few years. Because my parents would be almost 100 if they were still alive. So milk is one of the recipes, though, that does not follow any of the rules. And even as a rebel, I follow certain rules. The two rules I never want to break is I want to do the right, as Sarah said earlier, I want to do process for the right time for the ingredient. So if I'm adapting a recipe, I'm looking at that recipe. If it has meat in it, that's the longest time ingredient. So I'm always going to do that. And then you want to process for the correct temperature. So because milk is a protein, I am going to pressure can it. But people always say, like, milk's not an acid. Milk's not an acid. Well, we're going to go back to those 11 college credits in chemistry. The chemical name for milk is lactic acid. The reason they tell you not to give your baby a bottle in their crib and put them to sleep is because the acid in the milk will rot their teeth, you know, and give you cavities. So if you think about it, milk is an acid. Okay, it's a high acid food in that sense. Okay, so let's just get that out of the way first. Okay. Other than that, milk follows none of the other rules. So, do you have a funnel that did not get pickled? That's all right. I'll wing it. So,
I got one.
I'm going to do 1-inch headspace. They went ahead. Yes.
We don't usually use them.
I don't use it at home very much.
We use them to teach.
Yeah. I'm trying to use, there's a whole bunch of people that raised their hand earlier and said they were first timers. I'm trying to teach them the right way. It's sort of that mom's thing, do as I say, not as I do sometimes. So this is one of them. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
But I didn't want my milk pickled for obvious reasons. Now the other secret is when you're doing it from the top, your 1 inch is the end of the funnel. So that comes out pretty close right there. If you eyeball it or you use the end of your funnel here. Now today was really hot. I didn't set this milk out very long. But generally with milk, you want to start at room temperature. So you're going to have the water in your water bath, room temperature, and you're going to have, or your water bath, in your canner is room temperature. So I already filled that and set it out to the appropriate amount in the manual for my All-American. But if you're my mother, let me teach you how to measure. This is mother's measurement. You take your measuring tool and you put it in and you make sure that your water comes up past your first knuckle. Then you have enough water in your can. All right? So you get out a ruler, or you get out your measuring and you pour it in good, or you use mom's measure. Room temperature. Everything is room temperature. And no. And no. All right.
Do you need a gallon?
No, I'm good. I'll just wing it and do a thing of water and show them how to do that.
Perfect.
And just in case you wondered, that one somehow got some spices off the pickle, from the pickle off that funnel. And I don't want pickled milk. Well, we're going to get to that. That's the next mistake you can make, is turning this into cottage cheese. And it's real easy to do. Real easy to do. You can use anything, but here's the thing. So this is 2%. When it comes out of the canner, it's going to taste more like whole milk. All right, so whatever you're thinking is here, because the whole milk from the store is really only 4%. But if they put 4% on the gallon jug, nobody would buy it. Okay? So it will be thicker. So 1% will be more like, skim will be more like 1%, 1% will be more like 2%, and 2% will be more like whole milk. Okay? So I want to make sure that I have a canner load, and I spoiled that one jar with pickling spice, so I am going to can a jar of water. My canner, I know that the bottom of my canner holds 9-pint jars. I can actually double stack, but I didn't want to make that much today because the fuller I fill it, the longer it's going to take to cool down. And I want to show you after the end of Sarah's last thing. I'm going to take this out of the canner and show it to you. All right? So, they were good enough. I also need to disclaim this because one year one lady said they didn't wash the jars. These were all washed and sanitized for us, okay? And I already knew that. That's why I didn't do it.